Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'm going to share with you guys my top 10 small box games. These are games that come in small packages, but good things do come in small packages. These games occupy very little shelf space. Quite often they occupy very little table space, and you can easily pack 3, 4, 5 of these games in your luggage and take them with you on the go. So they make for very friendly or travel-friendly games. These games are also very economical. They usually range anywhere from $15 to $25. So without any further details, descriptions, and ado, let's get straight to the list. My number 10 small box game is Bonanza the Duel by Uwe Rosenberg. And this is a two-player only reimplementation of his classic game Bonanza, the game that put him on the map. And in this game, this is basically a card game, and the cards have these caricature-like beans depicted on them. And basically, players are planting them on their farm fields, and they're trying to collect as many of them as possible to turn them in for coins. So, for example, here you got this blue bean. If you collect 4 in a row, then you'll be able to sell it for 1 coin, and coins are your victory points at the end of the game. However, you are further incentivized to continue building, because if you can get up to 10 of these, for example, then you'll be able to collect 4 coins. And not all beans are created equal. Some beans are more obscure or more rare, and therefore they grant you more points when you sell them. However, it's easier said than done, because you have this field in which you're playing or planting these cards, and your field consists of two slots here. Eventually, you can open up a 3rd slot, but that's very limited real estate. Now, the regular Bonanza included a trading phase, very similar to Settlers of Catan. However, the two-player game, you cannot have a trading phase. Instead, it replaces it with what's referred to as the offer phase, in which the active player is going to offer a bean to their opponent, and that opponent can either accept that offer, immediately having to plant it, which might not be to their advantage, or they can make a counter offer a bean of their own. It has to be a different bean. And this little sequence will keep on going until one player accepts the offer of the other player. You could even bluff and offer a bean you do not have. However, if your opponent calls you out on that bluff, then you're going to have to pay them 1 coin, which means 1 more point for them and 1 less point for you, which is a 2-point differential. And in a low-scoring game like this makes a lot of difference. I used to really like Bonanza, but I have to admit, Bonanza the Duel, the two-player only game, is my favorite way of playing Bonanza. My number 10 small box game, Bonanza the Duel. Now we move on to my number 9 small box game, and I've got 2 options here, and that is Ganshan Clever and Twice as Clever. There's also Clever Cube, the 3rd box in this series, and this is basically an abstract roll and write game, but I have to admit it's probably my favorite roll and write game. There is no semblance of a theme, and I'm okay with that in this case. Instead, you've just got these sheets here. You can see these are already used sheets here. And basically, you got 5 different areas color-coded, corresponding with the 5 different dice you're going to be rolling throughout the game. And you're basically trying to complete cross off some of these boxes. In some cases, you're filling them in with the numbers that you roll on the die. And each of these 5 sections score you victory points in different ways. So as the game goes on, this is a dice rolling game. You kind of have to go with the flow, because there's not too much you could do as far as dice mitigation is concerned. There are some re-roll options that the game allows for. But other than that, you're kind of stuck with what you roll, and you kind of have to go with the best of it. But the cool thing is, as you start to make progress down the different rows or different columns in each of these areas, you unlock special abilities that end up making combos or combinations, where sometimes you'll have a turn where you cross off something, let's say in the green section, that allows you to cross off something in the orange section that might allow you to cross something off in the blue section. And then all of a sudden, exponentially, your turns are getting more and more powerful. And you're trying to score as many victory points as possible, ideally more than any of your opponents. Or if you're playing solo, this is kind of like a beat your own score kind of game, where they do have these different levels of of scores that basically tell you how good of a player you are. But I really enjoy this game, twice as clever, slightly different mechanisms as far as the grid and the 5 different areas that you're focusing on. But the heart of the game is the same idea. You're rolling the dice and you're choosing to cross off these different sections. My number 9 small box game, the Ganshan Clever series. And now we move on to my number 8 small box game, and that is Hero Realms. And I got 2 boxes here, both of them small, because Hero Realms here, this is a fantasy themed deck building game, and I guess you can count Star Realms and even Cthulhu Realms. I haven't played Shards of Infinity, but these are all small box games by the same designer, same publisher, basically the same system, if you will. And here, this is the fantasy implementation of the game, and it's my favorite of all of these different types of realm games. And it's a deck building game, and basically the base game is a competitive deck building game where you are attacking your opponents. They have health, and if you knock them out to 0 points, if you're the last person standing, you are the winner of the game. There are some character packs that were added in smaller expansions where basically it makes each player a little bit different. They can be a different class. They can be a cleric or a fighter or a wizard. And basically this here, the Ruins of Thandar campaign, is basically a box that makes this a fully cooperative campaign experience. So you go on quest to quest to quest, progressing along the campaign and leveling up your characters. You acquire additional skills and additional items that you add to your deck and or player area, which make your particular character more and more powerful and more useful going forward. And there's a little bit of a narrative that's taking place. You do have your quest book that kind of carries you along the story as you progress in the campaign. I find that this is an indispensable addition to Hero Realms if you enjoy it. But either way, they're both small boxes and do not occupy lots of space, so they qualify for this list. My number 8 small box game, Hero Realms. And now we move on to my number 7 small box game, and this is a more obscure game that not too many people are talking about, and that's Arkham Noir. And Arkham Noir is one of the few solitaire-only games that I have in my collection. I have a few others, like Friday and such, but this game here is only 1 player, but it's such a fun experience. If you like the Cthulhu theme, the Lovecraftian theme, this is something you have to look into. It's very much a puzzle of a game, very much in the spirit of solitaire, but basically you're trying to solve the mystery or the particular case. This is the first case here. I believe they're up to 3 cases right now, and each case plays slightly different than the other. And you're trying to solve all of the murder victims by piecing together a bunch of cards of different types in order to accumulate different clues and solve the puzzle. And I just find this to be such a fun little methodical game. I like the Lovecraftian theme. I like the solitaire aspect of it. The artwork on the cards is neat. My number 7 small box game, Arkham Noir. Now we move on to my number 6 small box game, and that is the Castles of Burgundy, the card game. And as far as table footprint is concerned, this is the largest game. It does qualify for the small box, but there are lots of cards in this box, and the way you line them up and set them up for gameplay does end up taking a good amount of space. So you better have a decent sized table when you play this game. But if you enjoy Castles of Burgundy, the original game by Stefan Feld, this is a great, smaller, traveling alternative because you can still take this with you very easily to another place. And it plays quicker than Castles of Burgundy, the board game, but it gives you a lot of the same feel. A lot of the set collection that takes place in Castles of Burgundy also takes place here. Now, the heart of Castles of Burgundy, from a mechanical perspective, is the rolling of the dice in order to determine which actions you could take. This game replaces dice rolling with the very same cards. So these are multi-purpose cards because not only are these the cards that you're going to be using to build your estate, build your city, and score points and complete different sets, but these cards on the top, they actually have a die symbol with a number, a pip value there. And basically, you're going to be drawing these dice, and they're going to be representing, simulating your dice rolling. So it's really neat in that way because it's still a randomization that's taking place, kind of like with dice rolling. But what's interesting here is that it's a little bit more controlled, a little bit more contained, because with dice rolling, theoretically, you can roll 5s and 6s all night long, let's say, and to some extent that might actually frustrate you because you might want to have diversify those rolls. But with cards, you're eventually going to get to some of those other numbers. So I find that to be cool. Again, it recreates lots of the fun things that I enjoy from Castles of Burgundy, makes it compact, and puts it into a small package. My number 6 small box game, the Castles of Burgundy, the card game. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop, my absolute 5 favorite small box games, starting with my number 5, which is Paperback. And Paperback is a deck building game meets Scrabble. Players are basically playing down cards that are going to allow them to build words. And every card you play is going to grant you money. And when you get that money, you can spend that money on fame cards. And your fame cards are basically your victory points. Now, not only do these cards give you a letter, sometimes a combination of letters, but also they give you their coin value, which is here on the upper left corner here. That's how much coin they will provide for you if you use that letter in the word. But most of the letters also have an additional ability underneath it. And this is a way to optimize your actions and your word building and your money producing. However, in order to trigger the actions on a card or the money, as I mentioned earlier, you're actually going to have to use the letter on that turn in a word. So if you don't use it, you don't get those points. So it's something to consider as you add cards to your deck and you build cards. And ultimately, you're trying to be the player who has the most fame cards or the most victory points at the end of the game. Really cool. I like the aspect of combining this concept of Scrabble with the very popular deck building genre, which I'm a big fan of deck building games in general. My number 5 small box game, and it's probably one of the bigger games and more oddly shaped games, and that's Paperback. My number 4 small box game is One Deck Dungeon, and this is a pretty small box. I'd say it's probably the second smallest box on my top 10. There's one that's coming up later on. Actually, Arkham Noir probably might have been a little bit smaller than this one. But One Deck Dungeon here is a fantasy-themed dungeon crawler that consists of one deck of cards. Your one deck of cards is your dungeon, and you're running through these cards. You're always going to have at most 4 of these cards available at the same time, making up your grid on your board, right? And they represent 4 different rooms that players can explore and see what's inside. And inside each of these, you either have an enemy, like this dangerous ogre here, or you might have some type of trap, like this arrow wall. And what's going to happen is you're going to have to defeat these challenges, these encounters. And basically, you're doing it by rolling these different color-coded dice that represent your different stats, your different skills or attributes as your character. And you're using them and placing them on the corresponding boxes that match those colors. And the pip values have to equal these amounts. Now, any small box like this can only be covered by 1 die. However, big boxes like these can be covered by as many dice as you can. And whichever boxes you don't cover, sometimes there's consequences like damage that will be suffered, or perhaps cards that will be discarded from the top of the deck, and that kind of advances the timer. This game is very time sensitive. As the game progresses, you run out of time and things get much more difficult. And ideally, you're trying to defeat these, and every time you get a card and you defeat one of these encounters, and you're basically guaranteed to defeat the encounter, the question is, will you survive all its consequences? But once you do defeat it, you get this card and you choose what you want to do with it. You can either use it as loot, which will basically be an item that you can use to add to your stats right here. You just slide it next to your character sheet, and basically it adds these symbols, so that's more dice you'll be able to roll. Or you can use it for a skill on the bottom here. This is a once a turn skill that you can trigger. Or you can use it for its XP, its experience points. And by adding on to your character's experience points, eventually you'll be able to level up to the next level, which will allow you to acquire more loot and more skills going forward. Lots of really cool decisions taking place in this game. Eventually you get to the big bad, and the base game alone comes with 5 different overlords or 5 different bosses with their own respective dungeons that are distinguished from one another. Really cool. I like this game. I like the experience and the puzzle of trying to build your character in as efficient way as possible. My number 4 small box game, One Deck Dungeon. Now we move on to my number 3. And my number 3 is actually a franchise, a series of games that you probably have heard me mention a time or two on this channel. And my number 3 is the Tiny Epic games, and I own tons of these games at this point. And right here I just grabbed 3 representatives, some of my favorite games. Tiny Epic Defenders, cooperative fantasy themed game. There's Tiny Epic Zombies, which can be cooperative or competitive. It could even be one versus all. Zombies survival theme. And then the most recent release, which is the Tiny Epic Dungeons, which is a dungeon crawler, but with the Tiny Epic gimmick, if you will. Small components, small cards, small table space. I really just enjoy these games. I love the philosophy of just having these small games with smaller pieces, smaller cubes, and smaller meeples, but that kind of depict a bigger gaming experience. These games still last 30, 45 minutes, sometimes 1 hour. So they give you this crunchier experience, but with the smaller component or content. And it makes it so easy for travel. And at this point, there's so many different themes represented. You have pirates, you have fantasy, of course, like I mentioned, zombie. You have space theme with Tiny Epic Galaxies. You've got the Wild West with Tiny Epic Westerns. You've got dinosaurs with Tiny Epic Dinosaurs, Tiny Epic Mechs. So all of these different themes are represented. Even so, right now they've announced the release of Tiny Epic Vikings. So even that Norse theme is being incorporated into their catalog. So I just really enjoy the diversity of all these games. And there is a certain similarity among them, but I just really appreciate what each individual game brings to the table uniquely from the others. My number 3 small box game, the Tiny Epic series. Now we move on to my number 2. And my number 2 small box game is Port Royal, designed by Alexander Pfister. And Alexander Pfister is known for his big box games like Maracaibo, like Great Western Trail. But he's a master at these small box games as well. And Port Royal is a pirate-themed game, nautical game, where players are basically partaking in a game of press your luck. You are drawing cards from the deck one at a time, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to get these ships. But you don't want a ship like this with only 1 coin on it, because it's not of much value. Ideally, you want a ship that either has 2, maybe 3 or 4 of these coins on it, because then you'll be able to collect more money, which gives you a better chance of hiring these different characters. And these characters are the heart of the game, because not only are they going to give you victory points, and that's the goal of the game, being the first player to get to 12 victory points, but they're also going to get you special in-game benefits, in-game abilities that you'll be able to trigger going forward that will give you advantages from the other players around the table. And it's really cool because you're ideally trying to flip as many different colored ships representing different nations as possible on your turn, because the more colored ships you draw on your turn, the more ships you'll be able to loot for their money. But if you ever flip a card that has a color ship that you already have on the table, then you bust and you are done with your turn, and play passes along to the next player. But there are ways of mitigating this. You can get different characters that have sword symbols on these, and you could use those sword symbols to basically deflect some of these ships and send them away and not have to suffer their casualties. But there's so many fun things going on. I also have the contract expansion here that not only adds a certain level of direction as players are aiming for particular types of objectives and characters to acquire throughout the course of the game, but this expansion also makes it a fully cooperative experience if you wish to play that way. And I do enjoy playing this both competitively and cooperatively. My number 2 small box game, Port Royal. And finally, my number 1 small box board game of all time is Oh my goods. And speaking of Alexander Pfister, this is also an Alexander Pfister game. This game here, and also published by Lookout Games, is the smallest box of all the games I have. It's a very tiny box, and there's not even too many cards here. This is a card-based game, as you would imagine, and there's a decent sized deck, but that's it. These are all the cards, all the components in this game. But this is my favorite game on this list because it is such a meaty game. This game is deceptive. The people that I introduced this game to are always surprised by how much meat is on the bone. The complexity of this game, the opportunity for strategies is so cool. Basically, players are trying to produce resources on these production buildings of theirs. And in order to do so, they're going to have to turn in a combination of resources to produce a more valuable resource, let's say, that's going to score them points throughout the course of the game. However, in order to do this, they're going to have to play resources, a combination of resources from their hand. You're always going to have a hand of cards, and a combination of resources from a public pool of cards that will get revealed later on in the round. Here's the thing. At the beginning, before you reveal this common pool of cards, players have to make the decision of whether or not they're going to act, their worker, they have a worker represented by a card. Is their worker going to be productive, or is their worker going to be lazy or sloppy? And if their worker is sloppy, then they only have to provide -1. They have to provide all the resource -1. So they basically get a discount as to how many resources they have to provide in order to activate this production building. But if they choose to be productive or efficient, then they're going to have to provide all of those resources. And you have a little bit of the information. You have your hand, your cards in your hand, and you, based on that, you got to make the decision of whether or not you feel like it's worth it to be productive or it's worth it to be sloppy, whether you want to be efficient or sloppy. And then later on in the round, we reveal these cards for the common pool, but we only reveal 4 of them at a time, or actually not 4 of them. We reveal them until a sun symbol comes out. And once a sun symbol comes out, that's it. You got to make your decision right then and there as to whether or not you want to be efficient or sloppy. And then after that, we're going to reveal a few more cards until another sun symbol comes out. And that's when you're going to have complete knowledge, complete information. But at that point, you've already made your decision. And at that point, you might end up regretting having chosen to be sloppy because you might have had enough resources to do so anyways. Or you might end up realizing that you didn't even complete your goal at all and you failed. And basically that round was a non-turn for you. You're not going to score any points. So cool. A little bit of press your luck, very similar to Port Royal, same designer, Alexander Pfister. But I really like the resource management of this game and the different objectives that players are trying to accomplish by placing down a certain configuration of buildings on their player areas. They'll be able to gain these additional workers that are going to allow them to do more actions later on. So there's an element of engine building taking place. Lots of really cool, neat things. If you like engine builders and you want a small box one that's economical and easy to travel with, then this is a game you have to consider. My number 1 small box game. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here when Harry met Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this list of 10 games. What's your favorite small box game? And which small box game do you wish I would have mentioned on this list? I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.